everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Well, Tony, as I'm sure you're well aware, big rap beef this week between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. And I was thinking maybe it would be good for podcast business for us to start beefing. And then I started trying to write down some mean bars. And then all of the meanest stuff I came up with was all about Kevin, and he's not on this show. So then I'm like, well, I guess it doesn't work. But, I mean, I don't know what rhymes with massive disappointment. I don't know.
Well, several things, but none of them are fit for air. Now, what I have done in the past, when I do write my own rhymes, I will just ask AI to do it. And so it's a fantastic way to just cut to the chase. And then you can just add in your own curse words as you go, or add, let's spice up this insult just a little bit more, because this one is a little too kind to Kevin. So let's really just dig in and go for the hurt. I think that's a lot of what you really got to do. AI right now, when the way it is now, it's kind of vanilla. So you really got to spice it up. You got, I want some almonds in there. Let's moose tracks this mother up. Let's get things going. And then you can find out that you can really kick out some pretty hearty jams.
Yeah, I already have the album cover for my next one, and it's an aerial shot, like a satellite shot of Kevin's house, and I've just circled all of the HOA violations in his yards. So that I think is going to be pretty fire when it drops.
Superimpose like a new extension to the house that didn't tell anybody about this. Look at this, and see how that goes. But anyway. Way too much about Kevin. Tom, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start to get the first couple of kickoff times and networks for some Ohio State games and for other big national games of note. I think the last couple of years, we've gotten a couple of kickoff times like mid-May, and then the end of May, you'll get a couple of more. And so I thought, you know what? We're not going to wait. We're just going to go through and predict through a thought process, very scientific thought process. We're going to talk this out, all 12 kickoff times and networks for the Ohio State season this year. And I would urge you not to set your hotel stays and road trips to what we're going to tell you here. Tom may have a different thought on that. I'm going to say, please don't do that. This is an exercise, not in futility, but it's an attempt.
Well, this is like, how the NFL mock draft people all spend there are people whose job is nothing but doing mock drafts. And it's like, wow, I got 7 of the first round picks correct. I am the best in the business of this. This is going to be kind of like that, except even more futile probably, because some of the specifics of the TV contracts are not known. Like, we know some basic stuff, but there are weeks when it's like, well, what order are they going to pick games in? And how many weeks does Fox really have the first pick? We have a best guess, based on available information on that right now. And if one thing changes, that will throw everything off. And some of these things are going to be dependent on, week 9. A lot of these are not necessarily going to be picked immediately. So will depend on how teams are doing this season. So yes, everyone always asks us about kickoff times, and the answer is generally, well, if you don't know because it's not out, we can give you a guess. But if you book hotels based on what we're guessing, that's on you, because we generally, we can make a best guess, but it is maybe only a slightly informed or educated guess.
Yeah, and I do have people asking me about when do you think this is going to kick off? So right now we're just going to do all of the games, and we can start referring to just go to the show, and I'll probably even throw our predictions in the show notes. So you know what? Just go there and read the thoughts and see if you agree. And so one of my things is for the TV scheduling, I always go to Matt Sars, and he's already put out his first 3 weeks of projections, and he studies this, and he's got everything. He's got information. He's got all of this, and he's still like making revisions on his first 3 weeks. But one of the things that he said is that he believes that Fox has the top choice for they basically get the first 3 picks of Big Ten games, whatever they want. Those are the weeks that they pick, that they get to go first. And then we don't know what order NBC and CBS go in terms of picks. We sat down with the CBS guy last year at Big Ten Media Days, got a ton of information, but there was some stuff he's like, well, I'm not going to go into that. Anytime it came to like, well, what about, where do you guys pick, or where does this, we're not going to get into that. And so it was a really fascinating conversation, but only so much that he would give us. So really the sense here is that Fox has the first pick for the majority of the weeks, and then CBS and NBC all will have their couple of weeks or whatever, but also they're just going to be rotating here and there. So that's why it gets a little bit tough to figure things out. And so, as I said, Matt Sars has the first 2 weeks of Ohio State projected in terms of Akron, week 1 being on CBS at 3:30, Western Michigan, BTN at 12 p.m. He's done more research on this than I have. So I thought, let's just let him stick with those. We can agree to that. But in terms of Fox having the three best games, basically, they have the opportunity to pick that. Obviously, the number 1 pick is always Ohio State, Michigan. He believes the one of the others is Texas at Michigan, which I completely agree with. That is week 2. His third is Alabama at Wisconsin, which is week 3, because it gives Fox an opportunity to have an Alabama game. And I don't think that's outlandish, but is that a better selection than Oregon at Michigan, or some of these other Ohio State at Penn State? Does that one make more sense just because of the unique nature of it? And week 3, it's not like Wisconsin has collapsed at that point yet, or Alabama has collapsed at that point yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I think I go back to the fact that they don't get very many chances to have an Alabama game on, and Alabama has an enormous fan base, and so that's an audience you would like to get to watch your game. And just to be clear, why do they not get Alabama, and why do they have a chance to have Alabama here? The TV contracts are all tied to the home teams. So in this case, I believe they're playing the game at Lambeau Field, but Wisconsin is still considered the home team. And so the TV contracts are all tied to whatever team is the home team, it's that league's TV contract. So Alabama as the road team, when they do a return game, I think they're doing a return game in Tuscaloosa next year, that would be under the ESPN SEC deal. This year, it's under the Big Ten deal. So that's why it makes sense that they would want to have a rare opportunity to get Alabama on their air. I don't think Alabama's played a road game against a Big Ten team since the Penn State series, and that was
2010,
12
11
years ago. Yeah, I mean that's been a while. So yeah, when you see these big brands, those are typically the games you're going to go after. I guess part of it is if you are having Penn State week 10, that's probably during potentially the World Series. World Series could potentially be still going on at that point. I'm not sure, but if it is, well, Fox has the World Series, and that has pushed what normally would be primetime games to afternoon games or noon kickoffs. And, the whole draw of the Ohio State at Penn State game is it's the whiteout, it's the primetime, and if you can't televise a primetime game, you don't get the whiteout. So we'll get to that one. But I do think that I certainly see the logic in what he's saying here. And just I have had Matt Sars on the morning show a number of times over the years. And just to give you an example to the level of detail that goes into some of these things where he's projecting, and it's like, why would he have Akron on CBS at 3:00? I had him on the show a couple of years ago, and there was where he had Ohio State's game picked had to do with the fact that Pitt had a home game that day, and that was another potential game that was going to get picked. But the Pittsburgh Pirates had a home game that day as well, and their stadium is next to the Pitt football stadium where Heinz Field, where the Steelers play, and they couldn't have two games going on at the same time. And the Pirates game was already scheduled for whatever time it was, later in the day. So the Pitt game had to be a noon game or vice versa. So that's the level of detail you're going into here. And that's why it's impossible to do this. Even if you specialize in this, it's impossible to get all of this stuff right. But that's the level of detail that you have to go into to get this stuff nailed down.
It's an educated guesswork is basically what it is. And so okay, as I said, Akron, 3:30 p.m. CBS. And that's going to be the time slots for all of the stuff. Fox is generally 12 p.m. CBS is the 3:30 game. NBC is the 7:30 game with the Notre Dame lead in for many of those weeks. So Akron, 3:30 on CBS. Predicted. Western Michigan, 12 p.m., relegated to the Big Ten Network. And relegated is a kind term for the entirety of Ohio State's non-conference schedule. And also in this practice, we're probably assuming that Fox, NBC, CBS, those are the top, they get the top three picks every single week. FS1 and BTN then get 4 and 5 in some order. So let's move to week 4, which is Ohio State hosting Marshall, where I'm wondering here, this is either like a night game where you get the random Ohio State night game against a lesser opponent, so you get the NBC. I don't know if this is going to be a big noon for them yet, because I see USC at Michigan, and that makes a ton of sense as a big noon kickoff there. What are you thinking as you look at this? Because there's Big 12 games that you also have to factor in a little bit, at least for the big noon kickoff, but not every week is there something worth factoring in. The Baylor Colorado thing, though, week 4, Deion Sanders, Baylor could be interesting. That might be something that factors in.
That feels like one where you're getting one. I think everyone kind of knows deep down Colorado is probably not going to be very good this year. And you're probably not also going to get kind of the bump that you got with Deion that you did last year. But there's still going to be a bump. You're still going to get the casuals who are, hey, it's Coach Prime. I'm gonna watch this game, and they'll just put his face on all the graphics, and everyone will watch. So yeah, I bet that one ends up being the big noon game that day. Ohio State Marshall, there's not a lot of other great options here, and Ohio State fans are going to watch whatever, just whatever garbage they want to throw in the trough. Ohio State fans are going to eat every bite of it. So you're going to have a pretty good audience no matter who this is. To me, this is probably, I'm going to say, either a night NBC game, or maybe this slides down to like FS1 and FS1 puts it on at night, one of those kind of deals. But yeah, I think this is the surprising primetime night game. Why is this a night game? I don't understand. That feels like that's going to be this one this year.
Because USC at Michigan, obviously a very huge game. And if we're already giving Baylor and Colorado the big noon kickoff treatment, are we looking at that as the NBC game? Or that's something, again, this is where you don't know if it's CBS has the next pick, or the first pick, they're taking USC at Michigan. And then whoever is left over, which a couple of other games just of note, Iowa at Minnesota, Illinois at Nebraska, Northwestern at Washington, for those two networks to choose from. It would just be nice to know whether it's CBS or NBC. So let's assume that CBS has the USC at Michigan game. We can push Ohio State Marshall at Ohio State to a night game. And then it's just a matter of, is it NBC or FS1? Are we in agreement? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm sort of seeing it, where there's two pretty clear-cut games ahead of them, and then 3 and 4 are both. NBC is definitely going to be a night game. FS1, I think last year FS1 might have had the Maryland game or something. There's sometimes that one can move around, I think, a little bit in terms of time slot, but yeah, that feels like if you're counter programming the Dion game and you're counter programming the USC Michigan game, you don't want to put the Ohio State game on against the Michigan game because those fan bases are going to watch each other's games. So yeah, I think primetime makes sense one way or the other.
And not having been on NBC yet, you're almost a month into the season. NBC might want Ohio State finally. That's another thing to consider. So I'm going to put them NBC 7:30. Week 5 is Ohio State at Michigan State. This to me might be the first time we see Ohio State big noon kickoff. Some of the Big 12 games to consider. I mean, TCU at Kansas, BYU at Baylor. So Oklahoma State at Kansas State, not really. And you don't have to factor in the West Coast games, really. So you look at Minnesota at Michigan, Illinois at Penn State, Nebraska at Purdue, Washington at Rutgers. Even if Michigan State is bad, which there's every possibility they might be, it's hard for me to imagine Fox allowing Ohio State to go like 5 weeks without being on Big Noon.
Right. And again, even bad Ohio State games do big numbers because Ohio State's fan base is so big and so rabid. I think you're going to see a lot of networks just when you have a chance to get Ohio State on your network, even if it's not the most exciting game, you put Ohio State on because the Ohio State fan base is just going to turn their TVs on and sit in front of their TVs and watch all of your ads for pickup trucks and cheese dip and farmers only and whatever else you want to sell, Barbasol between the touchdown and then the ensuing kickoff and then the ensuing first down play. You'll have lots of chances to watch lots of commercials on lots of different networks because all of them want to see those Ohio State eyeballs. I think Big Noon is a good call here. This is a week where there's not a lot of really exciting games. I mean, Wisconsin at USC is not bad. Oregon at UCLA is not bad. Minnesota at Michigan, I guess, is technically a trophy game. There's just the whole Big 12. Every time I look at the new games in the new Big 12, it's kind of like, boy, there are just no brands here. Texas and Oklahoma are gone, and it's just a bunch of store brand programs. So, I think this is a week where Fox probably says, why don't CBS and NBC, why don't you guys take the first couple picks and we'll pick a little later because the games on the West Coast, the one at USC, the one at UCLA, they're probably the two most exciting games of the week. And then Fox can get Ohio State on Big Noon, even with the third pick of the week, probably.
And then speaking of farmers only, week 6, Iowa comes to Ohio State. And this to me might be the second Big Noon kickoff for Ohio State in a row. Other games, as you said, the new conference, the Arizona at Utah in the Big 12, BYU at Baylor, TCU versus Kansas, Oklahoma State at Kansas State. Right now, none of those necessarily move the needle. Maryland at Indiana. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. West Virginia at Oklahoma State, Baylor at Iowa State, Purdue at Wisconsin, USC at Minnesota is interesting color-wise. But Rutgers at Nebraska, Indiana at Northwestern, UCLA at Penn State is something. Michigan State at Oregon is not an option. Michigan at Washington is not an option. This to me feels, again, Ohio State versus Iowa, feels like a Big Noon to me.
Right. And once again, a lot of the same thoughts that we had the last week, which is the two of the bigger games of the week, Michigan State at Oregon and Michigan at Washington. Michigan at Washington, you got to remember, is a national championship game rematch. So that one's going to go probably top of the heap just because of the promotional aspect of it, even though both teams have lost their coaches. Both teams have turned over a tremendous amount of the players. The helmets from last year's national championship game will be on the same field with each other again. So that'll probably be the first pick of the week. And because it's a West Coast game, Big Noon is not an option. UCLA at Penn State, that you could tell me that's the Big Noon game that week. And then Ohio State gets either the CBS or the NBC game. But yeah, I think I'm going to say Big Noon again on Iowa at Ohio State.
Yeah, Michigan at Washington seems like a perfect NBC night game, whereas UCLA at Penn State feels like a perfect NBC or CBS 3:30 game. All fits. You've got big brands all across the landscape, and I think that's kind of the point of the whole thing. So two Fox games in a row. Ohio State will not be on Fox week 7 at Oregon. Matt Sars already has this as a 3:30 CBS guess. And Fox, as I said, doesn't factor in. And so this is just a guess as to whether or not CBS or NBC has that, because this is going to be one of the most watched and it's the most coveted, one of the most coveted games nationally that there is. And so this is just a pick 'em, a 50-50 chance of getting this right in terms of who actually has it. And it's not like the other option in this, which is the other main game, Penn State at USC. That's not a bad either way, that's going to be a good one as well. So if he's already putting this at CBS 3:30, do you have any objection, Tom? Would you like to say, no, I will take tails instead of heads?
No, I'm going to, as always with these things, I'm going to side with Matt because Matt does this at a higher level than just about anyone else does. And I looked at this and I thought that to me tells me that he's pretty sure that after Fox has its first 3 picks, CBS has the next pick after that, because this is going to be a monster game. This is quite possibly going to be, if Georgia loses a game, and they do have a couple losable games in the first month or so of the season, this could very easily be number 1 versus number 2 in some order. Ohio State and Oregon are both supposed to be very, very good. This is finally Ohio State making the trip out to Autzen that they were supposed to make in 2020. There's going to be so much hype around this game. Yeah, I think this to me tells me that Matt thinks that CBS has the next pick after those Fox games. And then very easily Penn State at USC slots in as your primetime game on NBC. And Kansas State at Colorado, you get another, if the 2 big games of the week in the Big Ten are both on the West Coast and they can't be big noon, Kansas State at Colorado is a very easy slide them in, make that the big noon kickoff game. You could do Washington at Iowa for that as well, but you've got a couple options there. So yeah, I will say CBS 3:30. Sure, why not?
And of course, Ohio State is off the following week. Tom, if we're saying Fox has the first 3, and I like your theory that CBS has the 4th pick, meaning NBC is the 5th pick, what game are they choosing? Because that would give us, kind of that week. Like what is it Ohio State at Penn State? I mean,
it is. We're going to get there in week 10. You just hold your horses, mister.
Sorry.
Let's do week 9 first.
We'll go to week 9, Ohio State hosting and Nebraska. This could be a big noon, although in Nebraska they call it a big 11 kickoff. Really, if you look through here, as I'm doing quickly, Michigan State at Michigan is that week, which seems like a pretty good chance for that to maybe be the big noon, because other than Nebraska, Ohio State, and that game is in Ohio at Ohio State. So maybe that one, Tom, as I said, maybe I said on a morning show recently, when I went through and I just did Nebraska's schedule, I think I had them undefeated and 1 at this point. And so if that is the case, and assuming Fox has the pick that weekend, then I would say this is big noon. But I don't know that they plan it that way. So I'm going to say Michigan State at Michigan would be big noon, and Ohio State, Nebraska, Ohio State, this could be 3:30 or 7:30. And really there's no way to tell, but it would be nice to have another night game maybe.
Well, I think this is one where I guess we'll find out, who has the highest pick this week, because they announce the early games, as Tony said, later in May. You'll have, week 1, week 2, week 3, something like that. And then they'll announce, the big games that, hey, Ohio State, Michigan is a noon kickoff this year on Fox. Oh, everyone set your faces to stunned. There are a bunch of these where we're not going to know until either a week out or 2 weeks out. Generally it's 2 weeks out, but they have what's called a 6-day option where they can wait until after the previous week's games are done to figure out, hey, how big is this game going to be? And then they'll make that decision. So that's something where, we may not know the kickoff time for this until much later in the season. And it may depend to a certain degree on what Nebraska is doing. If Nebraska is, 7-1 or whatever it is at this point, or 8-0 at this point, yeah, that probably jumps to the top of the line. If Michigan State is better than Michigan State is expected to, and Michigan's better than Michigan's expected to be, then maybe that one jumps to the top of the line because that's a big in-state rivalry game, and that game has done pretty good numbers in recent years as well. So this may be a little bit of an it depends, but Michigan State at Michigan, that feels like it. That's going to be a very big draw. Ohio State hosting Nebraska, that's going to be a very big draw. So this is going to be the two games that are the, whoever has the first two picks this week are going to go those two, and then Penn State at Wisconsin's probably the third one. That's probably your third network game of that week.
Yeah. So, do we have a preference? Because we have to give the people the knowledge. That Penn State at Wisconsin feels like it would be a pretty fun. Is that a Halloween weekend perhaps? Because if it is, that's generally going to be a night game for Wisconsin, whatever that is. But
that's the week before Halloween.
Okay, so okay. Ohio State is at Penn State Halloween weekend. Okay, we will get to that one, but let's go. So that Ohio State, does Ohio State want to play 2 night games in a row? Not that they have a say in it.
Look, I can answer that for you very definitively. No. Does it matter? No. This is the Don Draper screaming, "That's what the money is for." That's the TV networks when Ohio State's like, "We don't want to play too many primetime games." Too bad.
All right. Let's flip. Ohio State has not been, as we look at this, Ohio State has not been on NBC since Marshall. So it might be good to give them the NBC game, which is the night game, and they would have just been on CBS the week prior. It's not exactly how this works, but we're trying to give everybody their money's worth. Now, week 10, Tom, I will let you go.
Ohio State at Penn State, NBC, 7:30 p.m. This is the one where I feel like, you need to book. The good news is you need to book 2 nights at hotels if you're going anywhere close to State College anyway. You can't get out of that, so you're going to have to book 2 nights either way. So my guess is this is the primetime whiteout. NBC gets their big spectacle game. That to me feels like if Fox takes the 3 games that Matt Sars picked, and then CBS has the next pick, and they take that Ohio State at Oregon game, NBC's going to have the next one. This is screamingly obvious to me that if the first 4 fall like Matt has them, this to me feels like this is almost guaranteed to be 7:30 p.m. prime time. And then, if NBC has the Ohio State game hosting Nebraska the week before, get ready to watch 100,000 promos for the Ohio State Penn State game, which would potentially also be on the same network 1 week later. You are going to see more Ohio State Penn State promos than you are going to see political ads on this TV telecast, and you are going to see a lot of political ads too. So, it's going to be, maybe, Tony, that's an argument for watching from the stadium. No matter what the tickets cost, you won't have political ads in the stadium. So maybe that's worth it.
You will have flyovers though. You'll have some banners flying over, not during the game, but before the game. And then, whoever has the next pick, and I don't know how much Fox pays to get, when they're not picking first, are they picking second? For this one, Oregon at Michigan is not, that's could be a fantastic consolation prize for whoever gets it. That would be a pretty good big noon kickoff. And then USC at Washington, maybe a 3:30, or UCLA at Nebraska, 3:30. One of those guys will be an FS1 or something of that nature. So I'm going to begrudgingly agree. 7:30 whiteout, which has been on Big Noon before, and everybody hates it, except for Ohio State.
Well, and they generally don't do a true whiteout. Generally, the true whiteout is always a night game. And so when Ohio State the last time Ohio State was at Penn State, they, the student section all wore white, but it wasn't the official whiteout game. The official whiteout game that year was like Minnesota or something like that, because it has to be a primetime game. It's generally Ohio State and Michigan in alternating years, or it has been, but they have had a few years where the Big Noon Kickoff and the conflicts with the World Series being in primetime and Fox televising that game has pushed that game to a Big Noon, which that has happened in the past. I think it'll probably not happen this year because, as you said, that is a monster week. This is one of these weeks where you look at it and it's like, this is why maybe the new Big Ten, 18-team Big Ten is not completely stupid. Ohio State at Penn State, Oregon at Michigan, USC at Washington. I don't think USC and Washington are going to be fantastic this year, but that's okay. Like those are 3 incredible helmet games. That's why these TV networks are paying all of this money for all of these games.
even Wisconsin and Iowa, just a old-fashioned Big Ten matchup.
Mm-hmm.
Week 11, Purdue comes to Ohio State. This feels like a BTN or an FS1 type of thing because Purdue's not going to be very good. But you look around at the rest of the schedule for the Big Ten, Michigan at Indiana, Washington at Penn State will be interesting at least perhaps. Minnesota at Rutgers, Maryland at Oregon, Iowa at UCLA. Not a glamour week overall, but you've got to find that second Big Ten Network game somewhere. It's just a matter of, is this a 12 p.m.? This might be a good opportunity for BTN to go at 12 p.m. to try to, because there's no fantastic big noon kickoff. This might be an opportunity to get some ratings or something like that. I don't know. What are you thinking there?
Well, you got to remember that they are going to be on FS1 at some point this season. They have to be, I believe, on Big Ten Network twice, if I remember correctly. And this is all, this is all, as Tony said earlier, like we sat with the CBS guy and it was just, we were sitting in the lunchroom and we just sat down and it's just the two of us and we're just keep asking him questions in slightly different ways to try and get answers. And like, super nice guy. We learned a lot. There was stuff that he was just like, we are not willing to talk about that. And it was very polite, but it was like, nope, can't talk about that either. Nope. Very good try. We can't talk about that either. And this is one of these things where there's certain portions of the TV contracts that are really important to understand that we don't necessarily have 100% grasp on, but I'm pretty sure that they have to have 2 BTN games. They've got the Indiana game coming up in a couple weeks. It feels like this is either an FS1 game or a BTN game, one or the other, and then the Indiana game is going to be the other one in a couple weeks.
Yeah. So we're going to call them both noon games regardless. Do we want to?
Sure. I mean, this is one where Purdue at Ohio State is there's not a huge, other than Washington at Penn State, there's really not another great matchup that you're looking at and going, oh boy, you can't go up against that one. So
yeah,
whoever has Washington at Penn State, we don't know whoever has the first pick this week is going to take Washington at Penn State. We don't know who that is. So you're going to probably not put this game up against that one. Other than that, you could put it just about anywhere.
Yeah, and Michigan and Indiana will still get eyeballs because it's Michigan. So I'm going to say BTN at 12 p.m., and then we will have the Indiana game probably FS1. But we'll get there. At Northwestern, Tom, I think this is interesting. Week 12 at Northwestern. A game that could be terrible, but in Wrigley Field could be
Correct.
a television situation to watch. And you look at the rest of the Big Ten, Michigan State at Illinois, Rutgers at Maryland, Penn State at Purdue, Nebraska at USC is out, UCLA at Washington is out, Oregon at Wisconsin, very interesting. But I feel like Ohio State at Northwestern is going to be one of those 3 games that the networks pick because of the scene.
Exactly. If this was Ohio State at Northwestern and they were still playing it at Ryan Field, there's every possibility that this is a BTN or FS1 kind of game. The games at Wrigley Field, like I know they've done some of them over the years, but it's been a lot of Northwestern Iowa, Northwestern Illinois, where the brand names involved are not that exciting. And so it sort of gets relegated anyway. Northwestern Illinois is never going to be a big, huge network game during rivalry week. It just doesn't, there are too many other interesting rivalries. So the novelty of the Wrigley Field thing hasn't necessarily worn off yet. And with Ohio State playing there, yeah, I could very easily see this being the big noon kickoff game. It's either going to be this or it's going to be the Oregon-Wisconsin game, one or the other. And I'm gonna say I'm gonna go big noon for this one because it just feels like that would be Fox. Fox is not gonna, if they have the opportunity, they're not gonna pass up that chance to go have the big noon kickoff show at Wrigley, and I mean, like you could build a whole you could build a whole block of 6 hours of programming around, hey, we're at Wrigley Field for a football game, and the novelty of that is going to have people flipping over, even if the game itself is, Ohio State minus 28 or whatever it is.
Now, have we considered the fact are the Cubs going to be in the playoffs at that point? Is that still going on? Is that November? Are the playoffs done by that? Yeah, I think they're done at that point. That's mid-November, unless there's like a strike of some sort or a lockout. the Cubs should already have their World Series championship well in hand. I do think Oregon and Wisconsin is interesting, but that's going to require Wisconsin to not be a 500 team, and I'm not ready to bet on that one yet. So Indiana, we have said FS1, and really probably does FS1 even do? They've got to do their Big 12 games kind of maybe in that slot as well, that 12 p.m. So maybe that's like a 3:30 or even. I wouldn't expect this. This will not be a night game because Ohio State will not want to be playing a night game the week before Michigan. They'd prefer to play as early as possible. So we know the Big 12 is more of a 3:30 type of thing because they get tired of the 11 o'clock game. So is a 12 p.m. kick okay for you here?
I think it's okay. One complicating factor here is that while Ohio State doesn't want to play night games the week before Michigan, and Michigan doesn't want to play night games the week before Ohio State, there is not quite the hard and fast, absolutely not, in terms of November night games that there used to be. That was something that sort of came out during some of the negotiations of this most recent TV contract. Once again, cue John Draper. That's what the money is for. I don't think this is one where they're going to, this is probably not the hill that someone's going to want to die on, that you're going to have Ohio State play a night game against Indiana. It feels like, maybe they do it at Northwestern, 2 weeks before, or the Purdue game earlier. I don't think that this is the one where you're going to see it. So yeah, like a noon or maybe 3:30. Just feels like Ohio State always plays 3:30 the week before Michigan for whatever reason. It feels like year after year we're watching the Michigan game in the press box of wherever we are, and then the Ohio State game kicks off at 3:30, and then and then their later start that week. But yeah, I think either noon or 3:30 on FS1 is probably a pretty good guess on that one.
I'm wondering if FS1 Fox doesn't want FS1 going with Ohio State at noon against big noon, so we can make this a 3:30 just to avoid that, and then they're just going against CBS and Wisconsin at Nebraska or something like that. USC at UCLA makes sense as the night game that week on NBC, as the lone interesting West Coast game that at least that I have written down. And that takes us to the final week of the regular season, Michigan, which has not yet been announced as a 12 p.m. kickoff on Fox, but it will be a 12 p.m. kickoff on Fox. And just a clerical thing, it has not yet been announced that it's a Wrigley Field game at Northwestern. That's just the intel that we're getting. So there you go, Fox, 12 p.m. So here, I'm going to read them down to you, Tom. CBS has only 2 Ohio State games this year. That feels like a miss on CBS's part. They have as many as BTN. I don't know if that's going to go over well. NBC with 1, 2, 3 games, which is about right. Fox with 1, 2, 3, 4 games. You know what? I mean, it's not a great schedule for Ohio State this year. So that's kind of, you're just going to have that one. It's a bad non-conference schedule. Does CBS want to, hey, if you want the Western, oh gosh, and that's CBS with having an Akron, Ohio State as well. Like, this has not been a great year for CBS.
And this is one of these things where we went through and we kind of tried to reason it out and think it out and consider all the other stuff. CBS is not going to want to have 2 games with one of them being Akron. So they may jump the line on something else just to get another Ohio State game on CBS. And so could the Ohio State-Indiana game be on CBS? Absolutely it could. Yeah, you put them on the week before Ohio State-Michigan and have everyone watch the game just because it's the week before Ohio State-Michigan. That's what makes this so challenging is there's no way CBS is going to want to have just 2 games with Ohio State and one of them being Akron. But which one do you want to swap out? Swap out whichever one you want, and then that, the domino effect from there is going to change everything.
Well, and that's why I could see the Northwestern game being a CBS thing. You don't have to change much. But then you've got like Fox with the same number of Ohio State games as NBC, which is also now become an issue. But you also have Big Ten Network and FS1. Does FS1, are they contractually obligated to have a game, or this is just an overflow, right?
I don't remember, like, I know BTN had a thing in their contract at
Mhm.
one point that they had to have every team on a certain number of times. FS1, I don't think there is a thing, but also FS1 is probably going to want to have them on just because you want to have them on because
Mhm.
everyone watches. So I'm really not 100% sure. Once again, feel like we're working with some incomplete information here.
Well, and when
Book
you
your
have,
hotels now.
yeah, you would think the Ohio State, Indiana game, and let's see, Michigan plays that week before Ohio State. They play Northwestern. Fox would like to have both of those games in some form or fashion so that they can just blast you with next week, Michigan at Ohio State, whereas you're not necessarily going to get that if the Ohio State Indiana game is on CBS or NBC or something like that. They'll talk about it, that it's coming up, and you might see. It would be interesting to see how much synergy there between these three entities. Like, watch Ohio State next week on Fox as NBC starts talking about it. You might see some of that, but you wouldn't see nearly as much as you would if the game is the game the week before, like we talked about earlier. The game the week before is just leading into the game after that. So we can leave Northwestern on Fox, Tom. That's on you. See, there's no way CBS just has two games, right?
No,
Okay.
they will have a third game at some point, and then it's just a matter of, does that pull from NBC? You probably pull one of the NBC games off
Mm,
and move it over to CBS, especially if CBS has a higher pick than NBC, more often than not. So
now, CBS does have the Oregon game in theory. So that's
mhm.
if you're going to have one.
Yeah,
Um, does CBS grab the Marshall game? We're not going to go back through and all of and relitigate because we went through the Marshall week. Can that become a CBS? Can that become a 3:30 when you've got USC at Michigan, Iowa at Minnesota, Illinois at Nebraska, Northwestern at Washington? Absolutely, that can become a
hmm
3:30 over some of those games when they look at what they if they're watching the show or listening to the show, and they're going to realize, you know what, we might want to grab that Marshall. But really, CBS is not paying all of this money to have Akron and Marshall. So
hmm
you've got to give them a Big Ten game. Tom, I am giving them, it's not going to be the Penn State game. How about the Nebraska game? Instead of 7:30, it's going to be a 3:30 kick so we'll go CBS 2 weeks in a row. They can hype up while they're doing the Oregon game, they can hype up the Ohio State home game against Nebraska the following week on CBS.
they do have a week
At
off in between those. But
okay,
your point
sorry,
is valid. If they are, they're going to want to promote
yeah,
that, and either way. So yeah, I think swap out one of them, and you can take your pick, and
yeah.
the again, the domino effect of swapping out one thing probably changes literally everything else. But I think you're right. I think it's very unlikely that CBS only has two.
Okay, so I'm going to read these all one last time for the entire schedule. Here you go. If you fast forwarded, I want to have a payoff here. Akron, CBS at 3:30. Western Michigan, Big Ten Network at 12 p.m. Marshall, NBC at 7:30 p.m. At Michigan State, Fox at 12 p.m. Iowa is on Fox at 12 p.m. Ohio State at Oregon, CBS, 3:30 p.m. Nebraska at Ohio State, CBS, 3:30 p.m. Ohio State at Penn State, NBC at 7:30 p.m. Purdue at Ohio State, Big Ten Network, 12 p.m. Ohio State at Northwestern, Fox at 12 p.m. Indiana at Ohio State, FS1, 3:30 p.m. and Michigan at Ohio State, assuming it happens, Fox, 12 p.m. Big noon kickoff. Tom, anything else?
Yeah, I think we've done our very best. We'll find out how best or how good our very best is. I feel like if we, you look at the NFL, the mock draft people who get, a third of things right or a quarter of things right, and it's like, oh, good job. It feels like, boy, I would feel pretty good about getting a third of these right. That would feel like, boy, we were really on it.
Well, if it's like my black stripe draft, we're going to do pretty well. So anyway, we've got to go. We're out of time. Want to thank you all for tuning in. There's a bunch of stuff going on at Buckeye Huddle right now. Kevin and Mark are on their Southern Swing, talking to all kinds of prominent high school recruits. Just got spent a few hours with the #1 offensive tackle David Sanders, talking with him, his family, his coaches. Got information on that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Great time now to become a member. We are currently running our annual spring sale for an annual subscription, which you can get now for just $69.99. So a bunch of stuff coming from the Southern Swing, going from North Carolina. The fellows are in Georgia now, going to swing down to Florida. And then who else knows what's coming? So check that out. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. We would appreciate that. And like and subscribe wherever you can find us, especially at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.